Hey, Shadowrent here. Today's video is going to be going over our viability of Fel Scarred and Aldrachi and how they compare to one another in Mythic Plus for the new season. So I have been getting asked this question a lot about what's best, and I'm going to say this again, it's not going to be a clear-cut answer. Even less so than it was in Season 2. But let me start out with what the tier sets do, because Havoc has gotten zero changes between Aldrachi or Fel Scarred. In fact, it's gotten zero changes at all. All we have is these new tier sets, and these tier sets are very strong. So, the way that the tier sets work in Season 3 is instead of being per spec, you now have a tier set for each of your hero talents. So we have a tier set for Fel Scarred and a tier set for Aldrachi. For Fel Scarred, you have two effects. Your two piece is Immolation Aura deals 30% increased damage, and this means Rage Fire will also do 30% more, as it's entirely based off the damage of Immolation Aura. Next, Chaos Strike damage is increased by 20% while it is active. I will note, if you have any questions regarding this, having multiple stacks of Immolation Aura up at once does not give you multiple stacks of the 20% damage buff. You only get one 20% damage buff regardless of how many Immolation Auras you have up. Next is the 4-piece. Entering Demon form, so this is either pressing Eye Beam and entering Demonic that way, or whenever you press Metamorphosis, it now immediately induces a Demon Surge, so it causes a Demon Surge to happen, and it shatters a Demon Soul fragment that grants 20% increased damage for 10 seconds. What that means is in regular Eye Beam windows, just our 20-second Eye Beam windows outside of our Meta Burst, instead of only having two Demon Surges on Chaos Strike and Death Sweep, you now have a third that's caused by the Eye Beam itself, and a soul that drops on the ground that you can pick up for 20% increased damage. Notably, this damage increase does work on Burning Blades. And what Burning Blades does is it's a 50% damage amp as fire damage of Chaos Strike, Throw Glaive, and auto attacks. We have other magic damage effects as well as Demon Soul that are working on this, and that means in your Demon Soul window, it's actually more like 65%. And when you add that on top of having the 20% damage amp from the two-piece, this can cause some issues that are going to be prevalent in Raid, but not so in M+. I'll speak on that more when I do a video about this for raiding, but it can cause us to not want to press Blade Dance in certain scenarios. In Mythic Plus, this shouldn't be an issue. You'll still press Blade Dance on cooldown, and none of that's going to be relevant because you don't run all the Chaos Strike talents, and it doesn't scale up quite to that point. Now, when you press Meta, it will also induce a Demon Surge, and it will spawn another Soul Fragment. So if you do the Fel Scarred combo that you currently do of Eye Beam, Death Sweep, Annihilation, Meta, Annihilation, Death Sweep, Eye Beam, you will have an extra Demon Surge from the initial Eye Beam and from the meta. That means instead of having 7 Demon Surges in your meta rotation window, you'll now have 9. And as I mentioned before, in your regular Eye Beam windows, you're up to 3 from the 2. Plus, you'll have a 20% damage amp for most of that window. And because of the talent that increases the damage per stack from Demonic Intensity, that means the Demon Surge that you're gaining does more damage than the other Demon Surges. Basically, you can count this as well as having an extra Demon Surge. The rest of your Demon Surges will do 10% extra damage. So, incredibly strong. The 20% damage buff from Demon Soul is insane. Plus, on top of that, you can line up all your 30% damage increased Immolation Auras into these windows, and that also means, again, the Rage Fire is also going to do 20% more damage as you're buffing the Immolation Aura. Between everything that is here, you end up doing a crazy amount of AoE damage through Immolation Aura, and Fel Scarred does crazy high burst. Just to bring up some examples, and now I'm just using my thumbnails. This was a Fel Scarred key that I ran, where I finished an Eco Dome near 9 million overall DPS. So, it's very strong, it could do a lot of burst, and I think it's going to mean that Fel Scarred is fully viable in Mythic Plus next season. I don't think it's necessarily better, but there will be situations that I might end up playing it in, depending on the dungeon and what kind of comp I'm playing with. Whereas Aldrachi does less AoE damage and maybe a little bit less overall in, I'm gonna say most scenarios. There are some where it will still be higher, but the strengths that Aldrachi already had are getting even stronger this season. What the tier set is for Aldrachi is the two-piece is increased, or it is increasing the damage of Reaver's Glaive by 50%, which also is a big source of our Soul Scar damage, so it's a lot of AoE, at least on small target cleave, and just a lot of damage in general. And it increases all other physical only damage by 25%. Now, if you go and look at a Aldrachi Reaver log, let me pull one up from live. Now, when you go into an Aldrachi log and look at it, you're going to notice a few things. One, Fury of the Aldrachi is really high, and this gets buffed by 25% from that two-piece. Reaver's Glaive gets buffed by 50%. The AoE portions of Death Sweep are going to get buffed. Throw Glaive damage gets buffed. Soul Scar would be going up because of this. Wounded Quarry is entirely dealt by that pure physical damage, so it's going to go up by a bit more than 25% as well, and that is all of our funnel. So, very impactful just off the two-piece. Then we get into the four-piece, and this has synergy with the two-piece. What the four-piece does is it makes the second cast from your empowered window stronger. And that is when you throw a Reaver's Glaive, your next Chaos Strike and Blade Dance are empowered, and the one that you cast second is doubled. So currently, if you Blade Dance first, 3 Fury of the Aldrachi slashes go off, and if you Blade Dance second after a Chaos Strike, 6 will go off. With the four-piece, that number goes from 6 up to 12. That is tripling your gain of Blade Dancing second and doubling the overall damage of what it does, as well as getting the 25% from the two-piece, putting it at 2.5 times the damage that it currently does when you swap to this tier set. The other portion makes it so if you Chaos Strike second, it allows Reaver's Mark to stack up to 3 instead of the current 2, and it will apply 3 stacks at full duration when you Chaos Strike second. This is only a 100% increase to the bonus of Blade Dance or Chaos Striking second, which is it used to give you 1 extra stack, now it gives you 2 extra stacks, whereas Fury of the Aldrachi went from 3 extra slashes to 9 extra. So Fury of the Aldrachi is going to be the key on this, and you will always Blade Dance second with this new tier set. Very impactful that you play this correctly, and it increases our funnel to absurd levels that have not been seen. So again, you can come in and look at our damage and think about the fact that Fury of the Aldrachi would be 2.5 times higher, and this is contributing about 60% of my Wounded Quarry damage, which is our funnel. So if you put this 2.5 times higher, from 500k DPS to about 1.25 million, and then you think about the fact that about 60% of Wounded Quarry is coming from Fury of the Aldrachi, that would also increase this by about 90%. Almost doubling our funnel just off of what happens to Fury of the Aldrachi. With the other sources of physical damage being increased by 25% or 50% in the case of Reaver's Glaive, I would say Wounded Quarry does slightly over double the current damage, and this causes you to do an incredible amount of funnel. Now, I actually ran the numbers and looked through this before, so let me spit out the exact numbers that I have here, and I'll pull up a screenshot of what I had talked about and done. Now, getting this over where my camera is not going to cover. The big takeaway here is our funnel is absolutely way higher than it was. In a single target build on 5 target, you gain about 16% damage going from 1 target to 5 target. You gain 16% on your main target. You go from a 5.2 million DPS single target to 6.1 million going into your main target. If you up that number to 8 targets, that jumps from 6.1 mil up to 6.6 million. In Mythic Plus builds, this is an even higher percentage, although it's partially because the actual raw single target amount is lower. The other part of it is that you're running Rage Fire, so going over 1 target is a pretty significant increase to rage fire damage, and that will also buff your single target a bit. But in a Mythic Plus setup, going from 1 target to 5 targets, you do 21% more single target, and going from 1 target to 8 targets, you do 31% more single target. This also does not include souls from mobs dying. So there's even a bit more to be gained from there, especially when you also account for like pressing Chaos Nova and stunning for souls, and just using even more Reaver's Glaives than the sim might be able to in just a pure 8 target scenario. So incredibly valuable and pushing the strengths of Aldrachi even further into what it is. So I've talked about both the tier sets, and as I said, both are incredibly strong. Um, I did show, the Eco Dome example that I had. This was Fel Scarred versus the Aldrachi Havoc, but there's going to be a damage gap either way, and I do think they do similar overalls, but it's really hard to tell exactly which one is better in what scenarios right now. Uh, but the funnel damage in some scenarios is invaluable on Aldrachi. There are some specific scenarios where it doesn't feel good. For example, if you're in a dungeon where mobs can't be pulled onto bosses, or there's just not a priority mob that really matters, there's almost no value to playing Aldrachi over Fel Scarred. In fact, Fel Scarred does higher pure single target, so if you're just fighting a single boss or a single mob, you're going to get more damage out of Fel Scarred next season, as opposed to playing Aldrachi. It's simply just better at that now. But, despite that, Aldrachi does incredible AoE in its own right, and when it's played around at the high end, you're going to be able to funnel in most scenarios. So some dungeons, such as Arakara, where you have mini bosses with AoE to funnel into, or the first boss, you have ad spawns that should be tanked right beside the boss, and that can all be damage funneled directly into the boss. Havoc does incredible amounts of burst on scenarios like that, and while it has a high amount of AoE, that AoE also gets funneled in. So it's very, very powerful. And I'll note these pictures that I have. These are just from random pug groups on PTR, but this was before the June 30th patch. So that means, at least here, this is before Assassination Rogue got its significant buff. And this is before Marksman actually got its significant nerf. Again, there's going to be a player skill difference, and with PTR keys, you don't really know what you're playing with. This was after Shadow Priest had gotten buffed, but before Frost Death Knight caught its last nerf. And I think with that nerf in place, I would be able to beat the Frost Knight or Death Knight now in this given scenario. So when it comes down to it, my honest thoughts are about the same as last season. Aldrachi, when it's played at a high level and min-max, is going to be incredibly strong. I think it's going to be very high value, and the funnel is going to make it very wanted for keys. But it's harder to play. Min-maxing Aldrachi, knowing when to use your glaives, when to spend, and how to save, and treat Reaver's Glaives as their own resource is a skill in its own, and it's difficult to do. And then there's a lot to be done about generating souls more effectively and keeping extreme uptime to keep your souls generating throughout a key, and that greatly affects your DPS. On Fel Scarred, I think Fel Scarred is simply easier to play. There's going to be some more important min-maxing now. There's some rotational changes that you can make around when you have Immolation Aura up, and in single target scenarios, chaining your Immolation Auras out for higher uptime on your 20% damage buff to Chaos Strike. And you can also use Immolation Aura as... You can use it as a very good burst tool, because it's just going to do such egregious amounts of damage now, as well as being put in with a Demon Soul buff so that you get an extra 20% on top of the 30% it's already getting from the tier set. There's also the fact that the Demon Soul that shatters off actually has a very small hitbox to pick up, and there's no button to pick it up like there is with Aldrachi. So you have to manually do it yourself, and it can be difficult to keep track of where and what the soul is. It's a green soul that pops out on the ground. So that's something that you need to get better to watch out for and pick up quickly after your eye beam, because you're not going to have it for the eye beam window, but you do want to get it at least for your demon surges after, and you can have your immolation auras running while you have that demon soul buff. So even with that, I still think Fel Scarred is going to be much easier to play The ceiling isn't as high on Fel Scarred; it's a lot higher on Reaver's Glaive, but the floor is higher on Fel Scarred. So if it's being played at a pretty mediocre level, I think you'll see a lot better numbers out of Fel Scarred. And if you don't feel willing to put in all the effort to learn and min-max Aldrachi to its fullest, I would likely recommend playing Fel Scarred in most scenarios next season, or just whatever you like to play, as both are going to be perfectly viable. As for builds, nothing is going to be changing in Mythic Plus. We're still playing the low mover builds. You can play Inertia with Fel Scarred if you would like. It can be good, but I don't generally recommend it, as you would be dropping Looks Can Kill, which is a significant amount of I-beam damage, and then you have to play your Inertia windows correctly. When you look at Aldrachi, again, we're going to play the exact same talent build as we play on live right now, but you wouldn't really want to play Inertia and Mythic Plus for this. Something that is brought up, and just to make this really clear, even though the new tier set promotes bursts around Fury of the Aldrachi, Inertia does not actually support that. Inertia doesn't have Fury of the Aldrachi on its whitelist, which means Inertia and Exergy, neither of these actually buff the damage of Fury of the Aldrachi. So even though it seems like Inertia would be higher value next season, and it absolutely would be, where you can have that 18% damage amp up when you do an Empowered Blade Dance, it does not work on the damage. As well as that, I do want to mention a small bug with the tier set for Aldrachi. Sims are keeping this in mind, but one of our physical-only damage abilities was forgotten in the whitelist, as that's what the 2-piece is done with as well. And that is Throw Glaive. So Throw Glaive, the original ability does get the 25% damage amp, but from the talent Furious Throws, which throws a second glaive, that uses a different spell ID. That spell ID is not in the whitelist, so the Furious Throw Glaives are not buffed. And these are also thrown by Screaming Brutality, so that means literally 50% of your Throw Glaive damage will be unbuffed by the tier set, so Throw Glaive effectively is getting 12.5% instead of 25%. This isn't major, this is like less than 1% damage over a key, but it is a bug that's there, and I just wanted to mention it because it it would not be something that I would like to keep out of the video. So yeah, that's about everything. As I mentioned, I really think, in general, Havoc is looking incredibly good, especially after that June 30th patch notes, which I'll have another video on, and you can go watch that. And it's just putting us into a situation to succeed in Mythic Plus. Even though VDH is looking like it's incredibly good and possibly going to be in the meta again, I think Havoc really has a place this season right now. So, very excited for the season, and I think both are fully viable, and you can play whatever you like. That's going to be everything for this video. If you like this video, please leave a like, comment below if there's anything about it that you'd like changed, or other content that you'd like to see from me. And if you like my channel, please feel free to give a subscription, and I will see you later. Thanks, have a good one.